An array is one of the most used things in programming, and today I'll show you everything you can do with it so you'll be able to use it more efficiently and make your life a lot easier. We can create arrays in a few different ways. Most of them are pretty straightforward. I'll just quickly mention that the spread operator in the spread array simply gives us all the items that in the array that we are spreading. If we say item 0 and then spread another array there, then we'll get item 0 followed by all the items in the array we spreaded. We can access an item in the array by its index by saying array name and index. We can also get the index by the item by saying array.indexOf. If the item is not in the array, it will return -1. However, if it can find the item, it will return the index. We can use a little bit of a different syntax to get the same result. I'll say .includes, and as you can see, this will return true or false according to whether the array includes the item or not. So if we just change this to 0, we will get false. We can add an item to an array by saying array.push, and right here I'll add item 0. If I'll run this again to see if item 0 is present in the array, we get true because we did push item 0 to that array. Note that if I'll just log the array here, we can see that item 0 is now at the final index. It was pushed to the end of the array. We can remove an item from an array by saying array.pop. If I log it again, we can see the last item was removed. We can store this item in a constant and log it as well. And of course, the array is still without that item. We removed it. We can instead remove the first element by replacing the pop with the shift function. Now the item is not item 3, but item 1, and the remaining two items are 2 and 3. We can delete multiple elements from the array by using the splice function. Here we simply pass the start index, so I'll start from index 0, and we pass the count of how many slices we want to make, so I'll say 2. Here you can see that the remaining array only contains one item. This is my last item because I started at index 0 and I sliced 2 items. We can actually get the last item by starting from the end. So in order to do that, I'll type -1. This will be our start. The negative indexes are simply the same, but from the end. So -1, -2, -3, and I'll cut just one item, which will be item 3. We can also replace this item, insert another item at the end of the array by saying item 4, and as we can see, we got item 4 right here. You can also use the slice function, which achieves a similar thing but in a different way. Here, instead of passing a start index and a count of how many slices we want to make, we simply pass two indexes, start and end. So I will start cutting at index 0 and I'll cut until index 1, and as you can see, we only got the first item because I started cutting at 0 and ended at 1. If I'll end it at 2, we will get the first two items. If I'll cut the whole array, so from 0 to 3, we'll get the whole array. And if I want to get the last item only, I'll start at index 2 and cut 2, 3. One thing to note though is that our slice function do not change the original array. As you can see, it is the same even though we sliced an item, while the splice function indeed changes the original array, meaning really the slice function makes a copy of the array before modifying it. We can join an array together by saying array.join, and here we can pass a string that we want to insert between every element of that array. If I'll just pass in an empty string, we can see we just get our items as a string with no separation between the items. But if I'll put a string right here, we can see we get this string between every item of this array. You can iterate over an array using a few different methods. We can use a standard loop in which we set an index to 0, and as long as the index is smaller than the length of the array, we simply increment it. We can do the same thing using a while loop. Here we'll set the index externally and say while the index is smaller than the array length, then we'll print the array at that index. A few shorter ways of doing the same thing though is using array.forEach. Here we can simply pass a function, or we can use this shorthand in order to get the item, index, and array, And in the same way, we can use a for loop and say for item of array, can simply iterate over and get every item. We can combine two arrays by using the concat function and pass a second array. And as we can see, the first array is in the beginning, and after that, the items of the second array. Another function we can use on arrays is the every function. We can say array.every. Right here, we can define our own variable, which will be x, and we can say x is less than 5. If every variable in this array is less than 5, then we'll print it out. And if not, we'll say at least one element is greater than 5. And as you can see, this is the print that we get. If we remove every element that is greater than 5, then we get every single element is less than 5, as we expect. In contrast to the every function, we have the sum function, which will return true if at least one element passes this criteria right here. So we can change this to a single element is less than 5. Now, if we enter element which is greater, it does not change this result. We still get at least a single element is less than 5. If all of our elements will be more than 5, then we get the second print, which will be all elements are greater than 5. The very useful function that you can use on arrays is the map function. We can create a new variable called map and say that it equals to array.map. Here again, we can pass our own variable x, which will be every item. This function will iterate over the array for us, and it will assign every item to this x right here. We can then access this item, say take every item and make it itself times 2. If we'll now log this map, we can see that every item in the array is now itself times 2. A similar function is the array filter. We can create another constant right here, filter, and run array.filter. Here again, we get an item, which the function will iterate for us. Here we'll say x.length bigger than 6. If I print it now, we can see the array contains only the long item right here, which is bigger than 6 in length. We can get the opposite. In this case, their length is 6, so I'm going to say smaller equals, and we get every item except the long item. You can reverse an array by saying array.reverse. We can also sort by simply calling array.sort function. If I log it now, we can see that if you pass an array of strings, it will sort it alphabetically. If, however, we'll pass an array of numbers, we can see that it sorts it ascending. We can pass two elements here, which will be the two elements for comparison. So the first element for comparison and the second one, and get a function right here and return the second element minus the first element. And if we do that, we can see we got now a descending order. If we'll change that, A minus B, we're back to ascending. The return function of the sort should return negative, 0, or positive. When the sort function compares the values, it will check if the result is negative. If it is, it will sort A before B. If it's positive, B will come before A. If it is 0, no change will be done. We can find an element in the array by using the find function. I'll create a result right here, and I'll say it equals to array.find. And right here again, we can get item of the array, and we'll return here item equals to item 2. If I'll now log it, we can see the function returns the value of that item. We can also use find last, in which case it will not find this item 2, but this item 2, the last one. The function I would like to introduce is the reduce function. I'll create a new constant, reduce, and I'll say equals to array.reduce. This function here gets two parameters, the previous item and the current item. Right here, this return will go to the current value. So if I'll return priv plus current, and in every iteration, I'll print my previous and my current, we can see that we add it up, and at every time we get our next element, this one, I'll actually change this to item. That way it is a little bit clearer. And if I log reduce, we can see we get a total of 15. Now, it is important to note that the current item will change by this function. So for example, if I'll have an array of strings, if I'll try to do this by, for example, taking the last character right here, parsing it to an int, and adding the int up, I will see that I'll get a problem here. So I'll say parse int, and right here I'll pass item charet, and I'll say item.length minus 1 to get the last character. And to this, I'll add another parse int, which will be our current. char@, current.length -1. And you can already maybe tell that there is a problem with this code, because the first time we get two strings. I take the last character, parse it to an integer, and then add those two integers up. So 2 + 1 will be 3, just like we get here. Now, in the next iteration, our previous item is an integer. And this is why I get this error. Item char@ is not a function, because this is not a string, this is an integer. So we need to be aware of it if we're going to use reduce. Handling it in this case is very simple. We can simply check whether the item is a string or an integer, but it is something you need to be aware of. That will be all for this one, guys. There are a few more functions you can use on arrays. Those are pretty much for a more specific use case. I hope you learned how to work with arrays in a more efficient way. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one.